It's been over 3 years since I started posting content about agency on my long gone Instagram account. At some point during the span of that Instagram account, life hit me with a grand opportunity to truly experience agency rather than just write about it. As I would learn from teachers and mentors and life itself, having an experience with something is everything. I became completely disenchanted with posting on my Instagram account as an expert, which is what all the social media gurus were recommending at that time. And then I became kind of disenchanted with social media altogether and began taking large chunks of time off, months of time off, until I was hacked by whoever for whatever reason. My Instagram, my email, my Meta account were all hacked. There were fake accounts created on other platforms in my name. The whole deal was so obnoxious that I cleaned everything up and got off Instagram, deleted my Instagram account completely. So since that time, I feel that I've really been just a student of agency. Gabor Mate defines agency as the capacity to freely take responsibility for our existence, exercising responsibility in all essential decisions that affect our lives to every extent possible. So agency is the capacity to act, the power to act in our lives. Our agency can be impeded, whether that be on a small scale, like for example, you not being able to take a certain vacation day that you want because your boss won't allow it, or agency can be impeded on a larger scale. Think voting restrictions based on race or gender. Our agency can be expanded on as well. In part of that definition, Gabor Mate mentions responsibility, 2 words. This is the capacity to which your emotions own you. So what is your ability to respond? What is your relationship to your ability and capacity to respond to certain situations in your life? There's so much work that we can do on our own nervous system to increase this capacity, to increase this ability, the agency to respond clearly to the events that take place in our lives. For me, another really important part of Mate's definition is the idea that we have some capacity to take responsibility for our lives to every extent possible. This concept, to every extent possible, started popping up for me around the time where I was getting pretty worn out with social media. I became aware of the term radical responsibility first through Instagram, and ironically, this was the beginning of the end for me, the beginning of the end of Instagram for me, probably the thing that kind of pushed me off. If agency is the capacity to make free choices and the power to act, radical responsibility is the idea that we are entirely responsible for the actions, choices, and meaning that we create from our lives because we have agency. What I was reading about and listening to around this concept of radical responsibility sounded like freedom to me. So I have consciously been pursuing the path of radical responsibility for 2.5 years or so now. I'm still 100% a student of this philosophy. I have not arrived. Always we begin again. Always I begin again. But I do want to share some things that I've experienced in this pursuit so far. First, emotional suppression is not a sign of strength. I am a pretty content and joyous person by nature, but I cannot slap a smiley face sticker over everything and pretend that everything is fine all the time. I'm also a caretaker by nature. And if I'm not in conscious self-reflection, caretaking can turn into people-pleasing for me really quick. If I'm not looking inside and allowing myself to feel and to process my emotions, this state of pleasing and having a wall up and a front up becomes so heavy that I can't bear it. Emotional suppression can look really, really strong on the outside, but it lacks the structure and the fortitude from the inside to be a sustainable mode of operation. I also want to point out that people-pleasing is a form of manipulation. It requires calculating your words and actions to get a desired result out of someone else. So for me, radical responsibility has called me to actually feel and address my emotional responses and the way that I relate to my emotions instead of suppressing to the point that I crumble or reach that manipulative, people-pleasing state. Number 2, on the opposite side of the spectrum from staying like artificially smiley, I have also learned that taking on the emotional field of the world is not responsible. And I will qualify that and say, for me, there was a time in college, like in my late teens and early 20s, that I probably adhered to the slogan, like, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. And that could have been totally congruent for my life at that point, at that era in time. However, I'm not really sure if virtue signaling, being a keyboard crusader, ever did or would ever do anything for me or for anyone else. I have gotten a couple comments actually lately, kind of to the effect that protecting your peace, which is not a phrase that I've used, but that protecting your peace is a form of ignorance and allows darkness to pervade. I've actually gotten, multiple comments on this subject, that not being fully informed, not fully informing yourself of what's going on in the world is actually harmful. This is a tough one for sure. And I would actually love to know what you think and what your experience is with this, if you care to share with me in the comments. What I can say is that I deeply feel the weight of my own home, of my family, my children, of taking care of them. I feel the enormous responsibility that belongs to me to create the kind of light and energy in my home that is strong enough to shine from within my home outward. To me, that responsibility is greater than my responsibility to take on the emotional field of the world, if that makes sense. This is not to say that I plan on ignoring the suffering of human lives, or that I like to pretend that the everyday injustices of the world don't exist. If we're talking current events, for example, I will also just say that my faith in media and in news outlets to honestly inform the citizenry is extremely low. When we give our energy over to entities that don't hold our energy in high esteem, in the highest regard, we are giving our beingness, our essence, over to them for free, with nothing in return. My last video actually called into question mine and your culpability in all things Epstein. Our outer world reflects our inner world. So for me, when the world feels chaotic, when my home feels chaotic, when my children feel chaotic, I self-reflect and take that chaos as an opportunity to ensure that I have taken full responsibility for my own words, thoughts, and actions, and that I'm taking responsibility for doing my part to create the world that I want to live in. Okay, number 3. I've used quite a few personal examples here, and I'm speaking a lot about my own experience, and that is by design. Because one thing radical responsibility has taught me is this phrase that I learned from another creator who I love, to keep your eyes on your own paper. If we have the agency to take responsibility for everything in our lives, it is useless to compare ourselves to someone else. The current lives that we live are a culmination of the past decisions and actions that we made. Plus and minus, if you do want to consider how our agency may or may not have been impeded on. Down to our genetic code, we are so different. So I fully believe that my way may not be your way. I also believe that our work here in this world is unique and may be expressed in vastly different ways. My work here in this world may be very introspective, creating and emanating love into this world from the inside out, while someone else's work may be very outward focused and activist, or someone who shares their love outward. And I guess a question that I have is, do we not need all of that? The last thing that I want to talk about is that radical responsibility has brought me closer to God, to the Great Spirit, to the living earth. I don't think that God put humanity here in this time by accident. We don't live in the Garden of Eden or in a utopia because that's not humanity's job right now. We have work to do here, and that keeps me in motion, moving towards my own healing, moving towards creativity, radical responsibility, the capacity to reflect on my own words, thoughts, and actions. It centers me and brings me in earshot of God, connected to the greater plan, connected to the land that I live on and walk on every day, and connected to my own soul. If there is something that you have learned from agency or radical responsibility, or if there's just something you'd like to share, again, on the importance of staying informed too, I'd love to have that discussion, to be honest. Yeah, I'd love to read all of that in the comments. Thank you so much for listening.